We live in a unique city, a city that is changing the world. With a culture of creativity and art that is recognized globally. We have a hunger for progress and are home to one of the top universities in the nation. Austin, Texas is an epicenter of political activity and a launch pad for technological advancement. This city is changing the world. But there's a problem, because 8 out of 10 people in the greater Austin area haven't experienced that God loves them and is for them. For too long, the church has been known for what it's against. We want to be known for what we're for. We are for each other, the previous generation and the next. We are for our community, and we are for what hasn't been done before. We are for growth, belonging, and purpose. We are for Austin.
Who just did that? That was awesome. Yes, because I agree. I'm like, yes, that is awesome. And I love that because, guys, we live in an incredibly special place, Austin, Texas. And you know, I think about, my story, and I think about my connection. You know, I've been in Austin or greater Austin area since I was 5 years old. I mean, I've been here a long time, and I've seen an incredible amount of things. In fact, I remember in 1980, that's when my family moved here. I remember at that time in 1980, my parents, came to my sister and I, and we were living in Colorado at the time, and they said, hey, we're going to move to Texas. And when my sister and I heard this, we were like, where are we going? And they're like, hey, we're going to this place called Austin. And in my mind, I was thinking, like, what are we going to do in Texas? Do they still ride horses? Like, I'm a 5-year-old. I'm like, what's that all about? And so we made the move in 1980, and back then, the total population of Austin, Texas was 345,000 people. And that is radically different from today. In fact, if it was 345,000 people today, we could get on I-35 and it would be perfect, wouldn't it? It'd be like, man, this is like, smooth, baby. But it has changed. But back in 1980, that's what it was. And when we came here, my family came here, we actually moved on the kind of the north part of Austin. We spent, some time there, and then eventually we ended up in Round Rock, and that's where I went to middle school, high school, spent a large part of my time. But even though I grew up on the north part of Austin, my parents would actually bring us into Austin, South Austin, and we would explore some really cool things. In fact, one of the places that my parents would bring my sister and I to quite often is this place right here. This will kind of go down memory lane. The Magic Time Machine. How many of you guys actually remember the Magic Time Machine? Anybody? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you've been. And I'm telling you, as a little boy going to Magic Time Machine, it was awesome. Because it was like Halloween every single day. Everybody in the restaurant would dress up, and they'd wear some of the coolest outfits. And I was like, this is awesome. And the middle of the restaurant was like this big car you could eat off of. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And so every birthday I'd go to my parents and I'd go, Mom, Dad, for my birthday, can we go to the Magic Time Machine? Because it was just an amazing place. And not only did we do that, but about once a month, my parents would bring my sister and I down to 6th Street, and we would go to this place right here called Katzs. And I'm not sure if you remember this place, but this was amazing. And for me personally, the thing I loved about Katzs was their chocolate shakes. I don't know if you've ever had one there, but every time it hit my taste buds, I'd be like, oh, this is lovely. It was awesome. And the irony about this is kind of, a little bit ironic. It says Katz's never closes. Unfortunately, in 2011, it closed. And, I think they're back in New York. But that was an amazing thing, and, love going down there. And then in 1987, when I was 12 years old, I ran my first and only Capital 10K. And back then, 1987, it was the 9th year of the Capital 10K, and the shorts were a lot shorter, especially on the men, which was kind of, odd, but that's what happened back then. And, I remember running the race, and I would sprint, then I'd get like a side ache, and then I would pause, and then I'd sprint, and it was just amazing. And what's wild to think about is that, times have certainly changed. Because the Capital 10K, today is that, when you look at, and you may not know this, but the Capital 10K is actually the 10th largest 10K race in the United States of America. And it's fascinating to think about how many things have changed and how our city has grown exponentially. In fact, as I think about my 37 years being in Greater Austin area, I think about technology, and when we first moved here, pretty much the only place of technology was IBM that I was aware of. My parents had a few people or a few friends that worked at IBM, but everything else was like, I don't know. I think of Dell. I remember way back then, I lived in Round Rock. I would drive by where Dell headquarters is today, and there were just fields, just big old farm fields. And now today, our city has changed. Now we have Samsung and Apple and all kinds of technology exist in this incredible, incredible city. And I even think about where we are today, in this very moment, in this place. 1431 way back then, and Leander and all this, it was considered the sticks. I think they ride their horses to school. It's way out here. And when we would come down 1431, which would be very rare, this location right here in all this area, it was complete farmland. There's just nothing out here. And over the years, I'm just telling you, it's been amazing to see the growth and the exponential things that have happened in our city. In fact, Austin Business Journal would say that, 1980, that our city, Greater Austin, was about 500,000 people. Today, Austin Business Journal would say that our city is at 2.2 million people in Greater Austin. That's a lot of people. And the article actually goes on to say about 151 people a day move into Greater Austin. And in a few years, in about a decade, Austin's going to be, Greater Austin, 3 million people. Fast forward another 10 years, in 2040, it's going to be at 4 million people. And so those of you who live kind of on the edges, maybe in Liberty Hill, you're like, I've escaped this. You've been warned. We are coming. And it's going to surround you, right? Because the city is just amazing. It just continues to grow and to grow and to grow. And for me personally, I was so reminded of this just a few weeks ago when a friend of mine invited me to go to the UT-USC game. And I remember going to the game. I actually took a picture from our seats here. And this is a panoramic picture from my phone. And it was awesome. I remember being at the game, and there was so much energy, and it was so much fun to see what was taking place. And I remember as we're in, kind of midway through, the announcer came over and said, hey, record attendance tonight, 103,000 people, jam-packed in this stadium. And I just think about that. The total population of Austin in 1980 was 345,000. That's 30+% of the entire population was crammed in to that stadium. And it's just wild to think about. And as I was sitting there, I had a lot of fun. It was kind of I think that's the game where UT kind of pivoted, and that's where it's kind of turned. And since then, we've won 6 games in a row, which is fantastic. We should just take a moment and celebrate that. But it's been awesome, right? But I remember sitting there, and the energy in the stadium was amazing. And the unity and the camaraderie, and when they would score, when there would be a touchdown, everybody's giving high fives. I didn't care, what they looked like or who they were. There was just so much connection and so much celebration and so much engagement. And guys, I sat there, and I literally thought to myself, I thought, wow, wouldn't this be cool if the church was like that? Wouldn't this be cool if this many people came together for something so big and so transcendent, and that there was this level of engagement? That'd just be awesome. And then I had another thought, and I thought to myself, you know what? Statistically speaking, according to the latest statistics, 80% of the people in this stadium, 80,000 people out of the 100,000 people in that stadium, do not go to church. Because that's the latest statistics in Greater Austin. And as I thought about that, I thought about this 80,000 people, 80% of people. I thought to myself, I said, I wonder if we just had a conversation. And I wonder if we had a conversation with those, 80% of people who aren't engaged in church and just listened. Instead of come in with an agenda, we just listened to what they had to say in their church experience. And I would imagine what we would hear over and over and over if you and I could sit on the other side of so many individuals who disengaged with church, is we would hear them as they talk about their story with church say things like this. To say things like, I'm very aware of what the church is against. And one of the reasons why I left the church is because I was very clear. Every time I went, I knew the church was against me because I didn't believe what they believed. I made this certain choice in my life. That I was very aware that the church is against my parents because my parents, went through a divorce and my church did this to them. That I'm very aware of what the church is against, that it's a church, against some social issues or against these cultural issues or against Hollywood or against a certain group of people who have a different sexual orientation. They're very clear what they're against, what they're against, what they're against. But in the midst of that conversation, if we could ask a follow-up and say, well, it's clear what the church is against. Can you tell me what the church is actually for? I think, honestly, guys, I just think there'd be a lot of silence. I think there'd be a lot of confusion. And today, I just don't think our culture is like a non-Christian culture. I think our culture is much more of a post-Christian culture. And I would define post-Christian culture as somebody who's, open to talk about God. I'm not sure I believe in God, but I'll talk about that, or open to talk about Jesus. Like, I'm not sure Jesus is really the Son of God, but maybe, can we talk about that? But a post-Christian culture is the idea to go, but when it comes to church, I've been there, I've done that. No, thank you. Like, it's not engaging, it's not relevant. It's I'm really clear what it's against, but I'm not sure what it's for. And so, no, thank you. And as odd as this may sound, because this may sound odd initially, but I actually think that's really good news for us. I think that's fantastic news, because at the foundation of Christianity, that's not the issue. People are very receptive to have conversations and curious about, does God really exist? Is there a God? And, if so, is Jesus really a son? I mean, those components are still there. And the reason this is good news is because that just means it's an approach. It's an approach issue. And guys, we can do something about that. We really can. And one of the things that I would suggest that we actually do is to go back to the beginning of Christianity and discover what the very first followers of Christ knew. Because for the first 300 years of Christianity, you look at the followers of Christ and, oh my goodness, I mean, they were all in. It was engaging, it was adventurous, it was relevant, it was irresistible, it was purposeful, it was meaningful. And you look at their lives and they would think, if they kind of could peek into today and they could look into today, they would go, boring? Are you kidding me? It's the most adventurous thing you could possibly experience, to live a life as a follower of Christ. So the question is, what did they know? What was it about those first century Christians that made it so irresistible, so radical, so worth going all in? So today, I just want us to look at that real quick, because I think it's important to understand some foundational things that they actually understood. And one of the things that these early followers of Christ absolutely understood is what Paul gives us insight into in Romans chapter 5, where Paul says these words, and this was so foundational at the very beginning. Paul says these words, look at this. He says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now, this is amazing what Paul just said. He says, but God demonstrates. The word demonstrate literally means to prove or to confirm. In other words, God, what do you want to prove? Because he's trying to prove this to you and to me. What do you want to prove? Well, I want to prove my own love for you, that I am for you. And how are you going to prove this, God? Well, I'm going to prove it by sending my only son into the world, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And guys, I'm just telling you, that image right there, it is so crazy powerful. Because the image Paul is giving you and I and the first century followers who knew this foundational news is this. It's the idea that somebody over here that is sinning against God, that is saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. God, I know what you've spoken. I know what you've said, but I'm just going to do what I want. And it's this picture Paul paints of somebody over here sinning. And at the same time, it's a parallel path. That God is over here, and he's not looking here going, well, I'm going to pay you back. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to get you like lightning's coming from heaven. No, that was Old Testament. That is old covenant thinking and teaching. There's something new on the scene. When Jesus Christ showed up on the scene, he introduced something brand new. It's not old, it was new. And Paul was making this point to go, that he's not against you, he's actually for you. That as we sin, at the same time, Christ is dying for those very sins. It's this parallel path that Paul is saying God couldn't have done anything more, that God did something in our midst to prove once and for all that he is for you, that he sent his son into the world to be what we could not be, to live this perfect life, to be a perfect sacrifice, to satisfy the perfect justice of God so we can experience forgiveness and peace with our Heavenly Father. And Paul's foundational point here and what these early followers of Christ knew is that there is nothing that through Christ, honestly, think about this real quick, that through Christ there is nothing you have done, are doing, or will do that could keep God from being for you. That there's nothing you could do that could ever separate you from the love of God through Christ Jesus. It's the greatest news of all time. And what the early followers of Christ knew is they knew this. They knew, hey, if Christ died for you, like if he died for you, then you never have to question if he is for you. Because of what you did last night, because of what you did last week, because of what you did last month, last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you never have to let that haunt you and cause you to question, I wonder if God is for me. This is foundational. This is what these early followers of Christ knew, that there's nothing you could ever do to keep God from being for you through Christ Jesus. It was awesome. It was good news. And it was like, you're like, why would God do that? Well, because he loves you. And what that's actually called is grace. Grace is unmerited favor. We commit the sin, but he rewards us. That's called grace. That's why it's called amazing grace. And these early followers of Christ, they knew this, but they just didn't sit there with that. They didn't go, oh, okay, let's all just kind of soak this news in and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and go like, man, that's such good news, although it is good news. They actually did something with it. And the reason why they did something with it is because of what Jesus said in John 13. What Jesus said is this, and this is so important to understand. Jesus says, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And this is huge. Because at the very beginning it says, a new command I give you, and I guarantee everybody listening to the words of Jesus, every good Jewish person understood the only one who can give a command, 10 commandments, 613 laws, all that stuff. The only one who could give a new command is God himself. That's it. And this is wild because Jesus shows up on the scene and says, hey, by the way, I'm here. A new command I give you. Huge claim in this statement. And the new command, he says, I want you to love one another. To which you hear that and you're like, well, that's kind of old, Jesus. And he goes, well, hang on. I want you to love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. He introduces a brand new standard to love one another. That he says, listen, your love is not to be based off of, a feeling, that your love and the standard of your love is not to be based off of some book you read or some religious upbringing that you had. Your love is not to be based off some philosopher. That your love today, because I've come into the world to introduce something brand new, a brand new ethic, is not based upon a feeling, it's based upon a person. And it's anchored in a person, and that person's name is Jesus Christ. And that's how you are to love. And you think about the life of Christ, and my goodness, the very people who nailed his feet to a wooden cross, who stripped him naked, who mocked him and laughed at him on a Roman cross, he looks at them on the cross and says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. That is radical love. That's our new standard. That Jesus looked at the tax collector and the sinner and the prostitute in his culture, people who were so radically different from the church of the first century. And what did he do? I must stay away from them. Look at their behavior, look at their choices. No, he leaned in their direction. He spent the majority of his time and effort with them. That's the new standard of love. And the ultimate expression of Jesus' love for you and for me is he gave his very life on a Roman cross, not for his sin, for your sin and for my sin. That's a radical expression of love. And that is the new standard. And so here you have these first century followers who have this incredible news. And the incredible news is God is unquestionably and undeniably for you, and there's nothing you can do to keep him from being for you. That is good news. But they didn't stop there. They took this with a new command, and the new command was active. It wasn't passive. Jesus says, go, you must love. Go, love, as Jesus loved you. And that's what they did. And this was never, ever a private thing. It was always public. And it was always about how can I be wise as I go public. And they were radical. And that was the irresistible kind of love. And it was engaging. And it was adventurous. And they were all in. And it changed the world. And that was their approach. And guys, I'm just telling you, as a follower of Christ, that's the way we're called to love. Not based upon how you feel or don't feel. Based upon how Christ loved us. That's the standard. And I'm telling you, with this incredible news in your life and this incredible command, this brand new command that Jesus gave us, that if you go and love your wife, love your husband in this way, love your enemies, maybe somebody at school, maybe somebody at work, maybe your boss, maybe a teacher, you'll love your neighbors and friends, love your sons and daughters, love your mom and dad, love the people around you. If you love them in this way, I'm telling you, it's the most adventurous thing you will ever do. It's one of the things every single day of your life you're discovering more and more about what's in you that's preventing you from loving people the way Jesus loved you. And there's never a question of boredom. There's never a question of depth. It's the most engaging possible way to live our lives. And that's what the first century followers of Christ did. And that's what we're called to do. And with that as a backdrop, I think it's important to understand that for too long, the church has been known for what it's against. For goodness sakes, guys, we've got to be known for what we're for. That we are for people, that we are for our community, that we are for the next generation, and that we are for all people, regardless of whatever background, regardless of what they've done, because every single person is made in the image of God and has value, worth, and significance. Every person. And that we are for people discovering and growing in a relationship with God and discovering there's a God who's for them. And that we are for people discovering there can be purpose and meaning in life, and behind everything you do and everything you choose, it can be substantiated by a foundation of purpose through God who's for you. And that we are for people belonging and connecting long before they believe. Because think about the life of Jesus. All kinds of people followed him and took step after step and said, I'm curious, and what about, and I've got questions, long before they believed. That's what we're for. And what's so much fun for me to think about is what you guys have created here at North Point. That you guys have created a church that is for people. That you guys have created a church that your son can walk into and discover that there is a God who's for him, not against him, because of what he did last night. That you've created a church that your daughter can walk into and discover that she has meaning and purpose, and that she is beautiful and made in the image of God. And when she looks in the mirror, she doesn't look at something that's like, oh man, God is so against me. But you've created a place that she can discover that she is unique and made in the image of God. You've created a place where your wife or your husband can walk into and belong long before they believe. And you've created a place through your willingness to serve and to give and to sacrifice so many different things where people who haven't been engaged in church in 5, 10, 15, 20 years can walk into. And they just can discover that there is a God who is for them. And because of your willingness to do what you've done, you've created a place for people just like the story that we saw of Eric. My friend Eric, where in his story he said, I came to a place where I could belong. And then he went on to say, and I found purpose and meaning in my life like never before. And for me, it's such an honor to be with you and to see what you've created here at North Point. And as a result of what you've done, especially over the last several years, It's been incredible to see the amount of life change. And if you've come week after week, you see story after story of life change as a result of what you've done. Over the last couple years, our greatest tension, or one of our biggest challenges we face as a church, is capacity. And if you've been here the last 2 years, you absolutely know this, because over the last 2 years, we've gone from 2 services to 3 services, 3 services to 4 services, from 4 services to 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday morning, back to 2 services, and now we're at 3 services. And if you've been here over the last 2 years, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And guys, you know why? You know why we've made all those changes? You know why it's like, oh my gosh, like it's one thing after another after another? It's because of this. It's because you've done such an incredible job at creating a place that is for people. And I couldn't be more grateful because of what you've done. Now, you may sit here today and you may go, well, Buck, I'm not sure that's our biggest challenge. Because if you're really honest, which I think you guys are, and I love the fact that that's true, you would look around this room and you go, there's a row, and there's a few chairs there, and oh my gosh, a full row. Like, Buck, there's plenty of room. And I totally get that. And here's what's really, really important to understand. That we have consulted with a lot of churches in the Austin area. We've consulted with churches all around the nation. And here's what you find is that the capacity of a church is always determined by its optimal service time. And to maybe help understand or give you a little bit more context, let me just show you for our church what we've seen over the last several months. So in 3 services, here's what we've seen. In first service, it's 19% of the total population comes first, about 50% of the population comes second, about 30 to 35% of the total population or attendance comes third service. And these percentages across the board are true pretty much with any church in Austin and any church around the country. And your capacity, any church, your capacity in 3 services is determined by your most optimal service time. And if you guys came a little early today, maybe and saw what happened in second service, this room, there was not a seat in this entire room. And that's what determines our capacity, because second service, 10 o'clock hour, the most optimal time hour for guests to come. That's when they're going to come. That's when your friends and neighbors are going to come. And guys, when they come second service and they have somebody in Upstreet, maybe their daughter's in Upstreet, and they try to check their daughter in Upstreet who's hoping to discover that there's a God who's for her, that church can be fun, what they discover is classrooms that are packed and lines that are full. And a family of 4 who comes in here, second hour, a family of 4 cannot find 4 seats together. That we are at capacity as a church. So guys, we've got a chance to do something about that. And what's really fun is over the last 2 years, as we've kind of bumped into this over and over and over, capacity, moving services and all that, we knew that this was a big, big challenge. And so we've been working on this. And we knew that in this facility, we lease this facility, our lease is coming up in about 2.5, 3 years. And so behind the scenes with multiple teams, incredible leaders, we've been working on this. And we've come to a place that there's enough substance, there's enough traction to go public and to say, guys, I want to let you know on what's been happening and where we're going as a church. So I want to give you guys some insight into that. And I would imagine when it comes to, how can we be for people like never before? How can we be for you like never before? How can we be for our community like never before? Well, it's to do this, we've got to make this move. And it's to make the move into our brand new or our permanent facility, our brand new home. And so the question with this is, where are we going? Like, where's the location? Where's this going to happen? What have you guys discovered, over the last couple years and really specifically over the last several months? Well, we've been working with a lot of a commercial real estate agent who's part of our church. She's amazing. We've looked at a lot of different properties, and we've landed on a property a few miles from here. In fact, let me show you. Here's where it's at. It's on Crystal Falls Parkway. And it's between 183A and this road is Ronald Reagan. So it's right in between 183A and Ronald Reagan. And across the street from this property, this is so cool, look at this, is Wiley Middle School and Rouse High School. And so guys, for us to be for people and to be for the next generation like never before, this is one of the most strategic locations that you can imagine. And then if we were to zoom in to give you a little bit more perspective, this property is actually 2 pieces of property. And so we put 2 contracts on these pieces of property. They've been accepted. We've been doing the feasibility. We've actually met with the city of Leander and talked about, here's our plans, here's what we're thinking about. And what's really, really cool that there's no major roadblocks or no major red flags for us to move forward on this piece of property. And so we got a great deal on this. It's beautiful. It's stunning. If you drive by it, there's all kinds of massive oak trees that you can see, and we're going to try to keep as many as we possibly can. And I'll show you one last shot of the property. It's a drone shot. It's in the evening, and look at this. It's just stunning. So this right here, this kind of dark edge, that's the piece of property. That's all the trees. And as you can see, again, there's Wiley Middle School and Rouse High School. It's such a strategic location to be for people like never before. Now, we've also been working with an architect, and I want to show you what we've discovered so far as well. So here's a site plan. This kind of gives you, it's the same shape as I just showed you, what we would do to that property. So on the front, there would be parking. Our facility here, I'll show you this in just a second. There's a retention pond, and here is future space. So what's really cool, this is 14 acres, and it allows us to create a facility about double the size, but it also allows us to expand. So there's future expansion, which is really, really cool. Now, to show you the floor plan, let me kind of show you what we're thinking. And let me preface this on this floor plan. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but at the end of our time, I'll give you a website to go to, and it has all the details here, so you can go through each room and ask all the questions you want to ask. But just a quick overview. So our overall facility, there's the auditorium. This is Wombaland and Upstreet. This is actually going to be 2 stories. And this is our dedicated student space on the bottom here. So if we're to zoom in to the auditorium, let me show you what this looks like. So here's our auditorium. Think very much of what this auditorium looks like, just about double the size. And here's what's really important to understand. That it says right here that there's 692 total seats. That's actually going to be about 750 because that's based on larger chairs. And so we're going to take these current chairs, we'll move them into the new facility, which will create a capacity of about 750 people in that room. And here's why that's such a big deal. Because today in 3 services in this facility, our total capacity is about 650 to 700 people. And part of the reason that's true is because this room is interdependent on Wombaland and Upstreet. So as adults come, kids come, and everything has to have ratios to be able to work. Well, in this new facility with 750 chairs, we could have, instead of 650 to 700 people, 1,100 to 1,150 people. And that's not in 3 services, but that's in 2 services. And so for those of you who get up early and set up signs and do all that kind of stuff, that should be one of those things you go like, oh, some margin, like 2 services. That's awesome. So that's really important to know about our auditorium. And then as we go into Wombaland, the thing I want to show you here is this venue right here. It's going to be a glass facade. That's where large group happens. And so you get to see what's happening with the next generation. You get to see what's happening with preschool kids and how they're discovering that there's a God who's for them. And then if you go upstairs, it's going to be Upstreet. The big thing I'll share with you about this is it has 2 large group rooms instead of 1 that we currently have. And that is so strategic for age-specific kids. It'll allow an irresistible environment for 4th and 5th, as well as kindergarten through 3rd grade, so we can get very strategic on helping them discover that there's a God who's for them. And then the last space I'll show you is the student space. And this is so cool because this is dedicated student space. We have so many middle school and high school students here. And so this is really fun to think about. Now, here's where it gets really exciting. So that's, floor plans. And for those of you who like those, and you're like, oh, that's so exciting. But for the rest of us, we're like, that's just lines, right? So I want to show you some renderings of what the facility is actually going to look like. So here we go. If we're to pull back and go to the front of this facility, think over here is Crystal Falls. That's what the front of the facility is going to look like. And I want to just preface this real quick to say, we're going to take a pencil to this. There's going to be some changes over the coming months to what this will look like. And as any major changes happen, we'll let you know and we'll keep you up to date on those major changes. But for right now, the whole facade would be glass. And this is cool because it faces the west, which means the sun comes up in the east. And we'll have natural lighting on Sunday mornings. And it's going to be absolutely beautiful. Now, as you go towards Crystal Falls, you can kind of see the edge as you approach the building here. Crystal Falls is still north of that facility. And then as you come to the edge of the facility, if you're kind of looking from Crystal Falls in, that's what it would look like. And then here's kind of an overall picture of that. Just know the rest of Cedar Park and Leander exists. It's not like volcanic ash, so don't worry about that. It's still there, I promise. But this just gives you a snapshot. And this is so exciting to look at and to dream about the future possibilities of being for people like never before. Now, with that in mind, imagine this. Imagine it's there and you drive into the parking lot and you have a friend who hasn't been to church in a long time and you walk into the foyer. If you did that, here's what you would experience. The foyer looks like this as you walk in, and directly to your left right here is all kinds of starting point rooms. Right now we have one starting point room. We would have a multitude, 5 starting point rooms. Starting point is a small group where so many people discover that there's a God who's for them and get their honest questions answered. That's so exciting to think about the possibilities there. And then over here are some kiosks. There's, for guest services, like for information, as well as for coffee, because we all like to be caffeinated, in the mornings and be alert. So we'll have some coffee there. And then as you walk into the auditorium, it's on your left, so you would kind of walk through these doors. Here's what you would see as you walk into the auditorium, something like this. And again, take all this with a grain of salt because we'll keep very consistent with kind of our flavor, but that's what it would look like. Again, about double the size of this auditorium. And then if you have Wamba and Upstreet kids, and you went to go check them in, this is what it looked like. And again, the colors may be a little bit different, but this is what I alluded to earlier. And this is so exciting to be able to walk, look in and see an irresistible environment where your sons and daughters or your friend or that neighbor who's with you, their son or daughter can look in and go, wow, that looks fun, that looks engaging. And they're discovering that there's a God who not only wants to be their friend, but who's for them. And then if you have Upstreet kids, you walk upstairs. As you go upstairs, here's what Upstreet looks like a little bit. There's going to be check-in. And then if you were actually able to walk towards this individual and that desk and look over the rail, which, by the way, we're going to secure that rail so your kids and my sons don't jump over it. So it's going to be secure. But if you were to look over and look into the foyer in a different angle, here's what that would look like. Again, absolutely beautiful. And then if you walk down the, Upstreet stairs and you go into the student space will look something like this. Again, we'll kind of put our own flavor on it. What you've seen here, we'll just make it, better there. And so this wide open space for students, middle school, high school, next generation. And if you walk through these doors into the auditorium, the student auditorium, here's what you would see. That hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the next generation discovering there is a God who's for them. Discovering that they can have a faith of their own, and discovering the safest place in the world to talk about anything in their life is the church. It's amazing to think about the possibilities. And if we were to kind of back out, here's the picture of what we've been planning and what we've been looking forward to over these last several months. So I would imagine after you see those pictures and some of the renderings, you would have questions about timing, like, hey, when's this going to happen? Is this, what's that look like? So let me kind of walk you through that real quick. So in terms of timing, the first thing is we're kicking off the series today. So this is our For Austin series that we're experiencing right now. And then this series, we plan to wrap this up November 11th. So this is going to be a 5-week series. And on November 11th, there's going to be something very significant and very special that's going to happen. But you're going to have to come back to experience that because that's a big, big day. And I'll actually tell you more about November 11th next week. And then we plan November 18th to move forward and buy the piece of property. So as it stands right now, that's the plan. And then we begin to start construction in September of 2019. And so if you've built commercial facilities or been part of that, you know that process. There's a lot of things and boxes you got to check. So we're currently working on that process, and we feel like that's enough time and we can begin construction then. We've already hired a construction firm and so on. And then completion, we're planning in March 2021. And then look at this. We actually plan to move in of April 2021. That is Easter. And imagine Easter morning that day, walking into that facility and discovering that God is for you and for your neighbor, and discovering that God is for you in a way you've never discovered before. So that's what we've been working on. That's what we've been planning. And it's amazing to think about our future. Now, I would imagine as you see all that as well, you would go, well, Buck, how much is this going to cost? Like, how in the world are we even going to do this thing, right? And that's legitimate. And so next week, we're going to talk about that, right? And you got to come back next week. You got to come back next week. And here's why. Listen up. Real quick, look up here. Guys, behind the scenes, over the last couple months, something has happened that I would say is absolutely miraculous. Something has happened that is only one of those things you look back on and you're like, God, you could have only orchestrated that thing, because what has happened has actually allowed us to move forward on a lot of these things. And you got to come back next week, because I'm going to tell you what's happened. And it's incredibly, incredibly exciting. So next week, we're going to talk about that. But today, as we kind of wrap this up, I want to give you 3 things to think about. The first thing I want you to think about as you walk out is to come over the next 4 weeks. This is a historic time in the life of our church. This is such a cool opportunity to be part of. And so we're going to talk about a lot more details and specifics over the next 4 weeks. So I want you to keep coming back week after week after week. And then I also want you to visit the For Austin kiosk. That's out in the foyer. You may have seen that as you walk in. And the For Austin kiosk is really for your questions. We know over the next several weeks, you guys are going to have a lot of questions. You're going to go, well, what about this? And what about that? And give me an example, or, give me more details. We want to have a place for you to ask your honest questions. And you also, have noticed t-shirts and all that stuff. All that's about, when something historic, when something's really cool happening and we get to be part of it, we just want to give an opportunity for all of us to be part of that and just to show and express that. So that's why we have t-shirts. It'd be great to pick one of those up. And then last of all, is I really want to encourage you to go to fораustin.com. I alluded to our floor plans and all that stuff are going to be in a location. This is where they're going to be. So a lot of the information I talked about today, it's all going to be right there. So this is a very historic moment for us. And this is such a cool thing for us to be part of. And I'll just leave you with this. As I think about this whole thing and think about what God's done and the kind of church you guys have created, I think about what a cool opportunity for us to be for people and for North Austin, because that's where we're at, in a way we've never been able to be before. And perhaps God will use what we do and what, we collectively say, hey, we're going to all come together and be part of this. Perhaps God will use that to make a difference in North Austin. But perhaps God will also use that to make a difference in Greater Austin. And maybe we'll be able to be part of a greater narrative, a greater story, that God will allow that to happen, to where one day, our big dream is to sit at the UT Stadium and to see a record attendance. And for all of us collectively to think, it's so cool that 80% of the people in this place aren't thinking about a God who's against them, but have discovered that there's a God who is for them. And what's so cool to think about is we get to be part of this. So guys, I'm so grateful you're here. I want you to come back all 4 weeks, as this is a historic moment in the life of our church. Let me go ahead and pray for us. Father, thank you again for today. Thank you for your grace. Thank you that you love us and that you are for us. And you've proven that. It's unquestionable. It's undeniable. And Father, as I think about this moment for us as a church, I'm really excited about what you have before us. And I would just continue to pray that you lead us, that you open our eyes to the things that we need to see. And Father, that we could be extraordinarily wise in the decisions we're about to make. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week for part 2.